My mother-in-law never accepted me. One day, I saw her secretly put something in my teacup. Silently, I swapped the cups, and I went pale at what happened next. Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where loyalty dies, lies bleed out, and the truth hits like a slap to the face. These aren't just stories. They're confessions soaked in betrayal and regret. Ever spotted a red flag when it was already too late? Say it in the comments. Hit the subscribe button, and then let's tear into today's tale. It was one of those Portland nights when the rain didn't just fall, it pierced the skin like needles. I still remember the way the wind howled through the narrow alley behind our apartment building, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and rotting trash. Sophia tugged at my hand as we hurried past the dumpsters, her little boots splashing through puddles. She was only 6, but her eyes caught things mine had long trained themselves to ignore. "Mom, look!" Her voice cut through the storm. She pulled free and darted toward a dark corner by the bins. I followed hard, pounding, and saw what had stopped her in her tracks. A small cat lay crumpled on the ground, its fur soaked and matted, one paw bent at an unnatural angle. When Sophia reached out, the animal flinched weakly, letting out a sound that was half hiss, half cry. I crouched down and saw the gash across its flank, the telltale puncture wounds of a dog attack. The blood had thinned in the rain, streaking its ginger coat like rust. "Mom, he's hurt," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't leave him here. He'll die." I bit my lip. She didn't understand. We could barely keep ourselves warm and fed in that damp basement we called home. Our rent was already a struggle, and pets weren't even allowed. One more living mouth to care for wasn't something I could afford. But as I looked at Sophia's wide, tear-brimmed eyes, I saw more than pity for a stray cat. I saw the desperation of a child who wanted to save something because she couldn't save the life she was living. I opened my mouth to tell her no, to explain how the world worked. That sometimes you walked away because you had no other choice. But the word stuck in my throat. Instead, I slipped off my scarf, wrapped it around the shivering animal, and lifted it gently into my arms. Its fragile body was shockingly light, every rib pressing against my palms. Sophia's face lit up through the rain. She pressed her cheek against the bundle as we hurried back to the basement. Our home was nothing more than a converted storage room beneath a sagging apartment building. The ceiling leaked the air, smelled of mildew, and the single-barred window looked out onto nothing but concrete. Still, it was all we had. I laid the cat on an old blanket while Sophia knelt beside it, whispering soothing words as though her voice alone could keep it alive. I searched our meager belongings for anything useful. An old towel, a chipped bowl I filled with water. As I worked, my mind drifted back unbidden to the long chain of choices and misfortunes that had brought me here. The parents I had lost too young, the education I couldn't finish, the man I loved and buried before Sophia was even born. I shook off the memory and focused on the animal before me. Its eyes, amber and glassy, followed my every movement. It was clinging to life, with the same stubbornness I knew too well. Sophia stroked the cat's damp fur and looked up at me with a smile that pierced through the gloom. "Mom," she said softly, "his fur is the color of gingerbread. That's what I'm going to call him. Gingerbread." I repeated the word, strange but warm on my tongue. In that moment, I realized that in saving this cat, Clea had found a little hope for herself, too. And maybe, just maybe, so had I. When I was little, I thought my life would follow the steady path my parents laid out for me. My father was a soldier, the kind of man who stood tall in every photograph, his uniform pressed and his smile just a little too proud. My mother was a librarian, quiet and gentle, her world built from shelves of books and the whispered stories she passed along to me before bed. Together, they made me believe the world could be safe, that as long as we had each other, nothing could break us. That illusion shattered when I was 9. My father didn't come home from a mission. All we got was a folded flag and words of honor that did nothing to fill the empty chair at our table. My mother tried to be strong, but grief weighed on her fragile frame. By the time I was 15, illness had claimed her, too. Watching her fade away was like watching the light in my own world flicker and die. When she was gone, the little 2-bedroom apartment we had in subsidized housing was taken back by the state. I remember standing on the cracked sidewalk with a garbage bag full of clothes, staring at the building that had been my only home and realizing I had nowhere else to go. I told myself I would keep pushing forward. I dreamed of becoming a journalist, someone who told the truth, someone who mattered. I even managed to enroll in college, clutching at that fragile hope. But tuition was merciless, and scholarships only went so far. I worked part-time, skipped meals, studied late into the night, but no amount of effort could cover the bills. Eventually, I dropped out another statistic in a system that didn't care. I took jobs wherever I could find them. Waiting tables, cleaning even, bartending. That was where I met Jason. He wasn't perfect, but he had a kind of wild charm that pulled me in. He talked about escaping the grind, about finding shortcuts to a better life. For a while, I believed him. I let myself imagine we might claw our way out of the gutter together. Then one night, he didn't come home. I found out through whispers and half-truths he got entangled up in something dangerous. Some scheme that promised fast money but ended in a body bag. He was gone before I could even say goodbye. In the days after, when I felt like I had nothing left, I discovered I was pregnant. I remember sitting on the edge of a worn mattress, the test clutched in my hands, staring at the two faint lines. My first instinct was fear. How could I possibly raise a child when I couldn't even take care of myself? For days, I considered every option, every escape. But deep down, I knew this baby was all I had left of Jason and maybe the only reason I had left to keep going. So I chose her. I chose Sophia, before she even had a name. It wasn't the life I dreamed of, but it was the life I had, and I would fight for it, with everything in me. After Jason was gone and the little savings I had evaporated, I found myself drifting from one borrowed couch to another, dragging my belongings in a duffer bag while carrying Sophia on my hip. Those days blurred together in my memory. Bus rides that smelled of diesel, nights in shelters where the lights never dimmed, and mornings when I woke with a stiff neck from sleeping upright in a plastic chair. I clung to Sophia's tiny hand like it was the only anchor keeping me from sinking. One afternoon, when the rain felt endless, I crossed paths with a woman who changed everything. Her name was Lucille, an elderly widow who had lived in Portland her whole life. She found me outside a grocery store, Sophia, shivering under my coat, both of us soaked through. Lucille had sharp eyes that didn't miss much, and after a long look, she pressed a warm cup of coffee into my hand and asked me about my life. By the end of that conversation, she offered me a chance, cleaning work in a downtown office building where she used to manage the staff. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. With that came a tiny room, a basement unit no one wanted. The walls were damp, paint peeling in uneven patches, and the single window was half buried beneath the sidewalk. From the street above, all we could see were shoes passing by and the occasional shadow. Still, it was ours. I spread out a mattress on the floor, hung a blanket to cover the cracked wall, and told Sophia it was a castle underground. She believed me. Life settled into a grueling rhythm. Every night after tucking Sophia in, I dragged a mop and bucket through the echoing corridors of that office building. The fluorescent lights hummed. Above me, the smell of cleaning chemicals burned my nose, and I scrubbed until my arms ached. My hands cracked and bled from the bleach, but I kept working. Some of the office employees passed me in the hallways with tight smiles or dismissive glances, like I was part of the furniture. Others didn't see me at all. Back in the basement, Sophia would chatter about the day she would have her own room with pink curtains, or how she'd invite her friends over for sleepovers. I nodded and smiled, though my chest tightened with guilt. I wanted to give her everything. Yet all I had was a damp mattress and a leaky ceiling. When gingerbread came into our lives, things shifted, if only a little. Sophia doted on him, wrapping him in scarves, feeding him scraps from our table, whispering secrets into his fur as though he could carry her worries away. Watching her laugh while he batted at a string made the basement feel less like a cage and more like a home. For the first time in a long time, hope curled quietly inside me. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep us going. Gingerbread's condition didn't improve the way I hoped. Despite my makeshift bandages and bowls of water, he grew weaker by the day. His paw hung limply, and his breathing turned shallow, rattling in the stillness of our basement. Sophia cried herself to sleep more than once, clutching him against her chest. I couldn't stand to watch her hope dim like that. So one rainy afternoon, I wrapped the little cat in an old blanket and told Sophia we were taking him to see a real doctor. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she skipped beside me as we walked through the slick streets. The veterinary clinic wasn't far. A modest brick building with a painted paw print on the glass door. Inside, it smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh hay. A strange combination that instantly reminded me of both hospitals and barns. I hesitated at the front desk, my hand tightening on the blanket, unsure if I could even afford to stand there. That was when he appeared. "Can I help you?" His voice was calm, steady. I looked up to see a tall man in a white coat. His dark hair flecked with gray at the temples. His eyes, a deep hazel, softened when they fell on Clee holding the bundle in her arms. "It's our cat," Sophia blurted, her voice urgent. "He's hurt really bad. Please, you have to fix him." I opened my mouth to apologize, to explain that I had no money, but the words tangled in my throat. The man, Dr. Adrian Reed, as his badge read, took the bundle gently from Sophia's arms and peeled back the blanket. He examined Gingerbread with practiced hands, his brow furrowing. "He's been through a fight," Adrian murmured almost to himself. "But he's a fighter. Let's see what we can do." He carried the cat into the exam room, and without thinking, Sophia and I followed. I stood awkwardly in the corner, watching him work. His movements were precise but gentle, the way he cleaned the wound and set the broken paw. When Sophia asked questions, "Will it hurt him? Is he going to die?" Adrian answered with patience, never once brushing her aside. When he finally looked up, I braced myself for the question about payment. Instead, he smiled faintly. "No charge. He deserves a chance." The relief that swept over me was sharp enough to sting. I managed a weak thank you, but my cheeks burned with shame. I hated feeling like a charity case, hated that he probably saw me as nothing more than the cleaning woman from his building. Because I recognized him now. Adrian lived in the very office tower where I scrubbed floors each night. I had seen him once or twice stepping out of the elevator, polished and professional, while I kept my head down with a mop in hand. I expected pity, maybe even discomfort, but what I saw in his expression was different. He didn't look at me like I was invisible. He looked at me like I mattered. Sophia, oblivious to my turmoil, sat cross-legged on the floor, beside the exam table, her hand stroking Gingerbread's bandaged paw. She gazed up at Adrian with absolute trust, as though he had descended like some kind of hero just for her, and in that quiet, sterile room, something shifted. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of a connection that would change the course of our lives. It didn't take long for trouble to find us. A week after Gingerbread came back from the clinic, our landlord showed up at the basement door. He was a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, the kind who enjoyed reminding tenants of their place. "I heard meowing down here," he said, pushing past me before I could protest. His flashlight beam swept across the damp concrete floor until it landed on Sophia, who was cradling Gingerbread in her arms. The cat blinked sleepily at the intrusion. The landlord's mouth twisted into a snare. "No pets. It's in the lease. You know the rules." I tried to explain, just a stray. "We're helping. Just temporary," but he cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Either the cat goes or you both go. You've got until the end of the week." When he left, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor. Sophia rushed to my side, whispering that everything would be okay, but I could barely hear her. My chest felt like it was collapsing. I had fought so hard to give her even this meager shelter, and now it was about to be ripped away. That night, when Sophia fell asleep, clutching Gingerbread, I cried quietly into my pillow. I had no backup plan, no savings, no family to call. The thought of dragging my daughter back to the shelters, of watching her sleep under flickering lights again, broke me in a way nothing else had. The next day, as I left work, I nearly walked straight into Adrian. He was standing by the doorway, his hands in the pockets of his coat, as though he had been waiting. "You don't look okay," he said gently. I tried to brush it off, but the dam broke. Words spilled out about the landlord, about Sophia, about the cat that had become our only comfort. To my embarrassment, my voice cracked and tears slid down my cheeks. Adrian didn't flinch. He just listened. Then, after a pause, he said the words that changed everything. "Come stay with me. Both of you. There's plenty of room." I shook my head immediately. "I can't. We'd be a burden. People would talk." "And I, Lisa," he interrupted softly. "You and Sophia need a safe place. That's what matters. Let me help." For a long moment, I stood frozen, pride wearing with desperation. Every instinct told me not to accept charity, not to let anyone see how fragile I really was. But then I thought of Sophia, of the way her small body curled up against gingerbread each night, clinging to scraps of comfort. I couldn't let her lose that, too, so I nodded. When we stepped into Adrian's apartment for the first time, Sophia gasped. The windows were wide and bright, the walls painted in soft earth tones, the air free of mildew. She ran from room to room, her laughter echoing in a way I hadn't heard in years. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching the strap of my bag. "We'll earn our keep," I said, firmly. "I'll clean, cook, whatever you need." Adrian only smiled. "You don't owe me anything." But I insisted, and from that day forward, I worked quietly around his home, polishing counters, folding laundry, finding ways to repay kindness I didn't feel I deserved. I had just begun to settle into the fragile rhythm of our new life when the storm arrived at Adrian's door in the shape of his mother. Helen Reed was the kind of woman you noticed before she even spoke. Tall, impeccably dressed, her silver hair swept back from a face carved in sharp lines of authority. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her life giving orders and expecting obedience. I first saw her standing in the doorway one Saturday morning, a designer handbag looped over her arm, her eyes narrowing. The moment they landed on me. "And who exactly are you?" she asked, her tone clipped as though I were a trespasser. Before I could answer, Sophia peeked from behind me, clutching gingerbread. Helen's gaze swept over her, then returned to me with something colder than disdain. It was calculation. Adrian emerged from the kitchen, clearly caught off guard. "Mom, this is Lisa, and that's her daughter, Sophia." Helen's eyebrows arched. "And why are they here in your home?" I felt my face flush. Before Adrian could speak, I tried to explain, just temporary, just until I could find something else. But Helen cut me off with a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, I see. A single mother with a child and a sob story. Adrian, really? You've always been too soft-heated. This," she gestured at me with a wave of her manicured hand, "this is nothing but a gold digger who saw her chance." Words struck like a slap. I stood frozen, shame and anger wearing inside me. I wanted to shout back to tell her she didn't know me. Didn't know the nights I'd spent scrubbing floors until my fingers bled. Didn't know the hunger I'd hidden for my daughter, but the lump in my throat was too heavy. Adrian's voice broke through my silence sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Enough, Mom." Helen blinked at him, clearly unaccustomed to resistance. "Lisa is not what you think," he continued firmly. "She and Sophia needed help, and I wanted them here. That's my decision, and if you can't respect it, then maybe you should leave." For a moment, the room felt suspended in air. Helen's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes flashing with fury. I could see the battle raging inside her, the need to control her son, the disbelief that he would defy her so openly. Finally, she turned on her heel, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood as she stalked out. The door slammed behind her, leaving silence in her wake. I stood there trembling, still clutching Sophia's hand. Adrian crossed the room and laid his hand gently on my shoulder. "Don't listen to her," he said softly. "I know who you are." For the first time, I believed he really did. In that moment, the line was drawn. Helen Reed was no longer just Adrian's mother. She was the shadow looming over us, the villain who would stop at nothing to tear apart the fragile happiness we were building. The weeks that followed Helen's outburst should have been unbearable. But inside Adrian's apartment, life began to take on a different rhythm. Each day felt like we were building something small and fragile. Brick by brick, Adrian would come home from the clinic in the evenings, his coat damp from the Portland rain, and we'd share simple dinners at the kitchen table, meatloaf, soup, whatever I could piece together from the groceries he insisted on stocking. Sophia would chatter endlessly about school, about gingerbreads, antics, about dreams she didn't yet realize were too big for a basement world. Adrian listened to her with the same patience he gave his patients, nodding as if every word mattered. When Sophia went to bed, Adrian and I would linger. At first, it was small talk, surface level careful, but slowly the walls came down. One night, his voice grew quiet as he told me about his wife. Her name had been Claire. She died in a car accident 5 years earlier, a sudden and senseless loss that had gutted him. He admitted he hadn't let anyone close since. I remember sitting there in the dim glow of the kitchen lamp, listening to the way his voice cracked, the grief still raw beneath his steady exterior. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in my pain. Our tragedies were different, but the hollow spaces they left inside us felt eerily the same. In return, I told him pieces of my own story, the parents I lost, the dreams I buried, Jason, and the heartbreak that left me raising Clee alone. His eyes didn't hold pity when I spoke. They held understanding, a quiet recognition that settled into my bones like warmth after a long chill. The nights grew longer, the rain heavier. But inside those walls, I found something I hadn't dared hope for. Peace. On New Year's Eve, we stayed in. Sophia insisted on making decorations from scraps of colored paper, taping them to the windows while gingerbread potted the falling confetti. At midnight, as fireworks cracked faintly in the distance, Sophia squeezed between us on the couch, her small voice carrying more weight than she knew. "I want us to always be together," she whispered, her eyes shining with the kind of hope only a child could summon. "Me, Mom, and you, Adrian." I froze, my heart lodged in my throat. Adrian looked at her, then at me, and in that moment, something in his gaze shifted. Resolve, tenderness, something more than either of us had dared to name. He reached into his pocket, and before I could breathe, he held out a simple silver ring. "Lisa," he said softly, "I don't want this to be temporary. I want us to build a life together. Will you marry me?" My hand shook as tears blurred my vision. Sophia gasped, her smile wide enough to light the whole room. I said yes, and for the first time in so many years, happiness didn't feel like something borrowed. It felt like it belonged to me. Our wedding wasn't the kind people write about in magazines. There were no chandeliers, no grand halls, no orchestra swelling as I walked down the aisle. It was small, intimate, just a few close friends from Adrian's clinic, Lucille and Sophia bouncing excitedly in her dress as flower petals stuck to her shoes. We stood under the arch of a community garden, Portland, rain misting lightly against a canopy of twinkling string lights. I wore a simple cream dress borrowed from a neighbor, and Adrian looked almost boyish in his gray suit, the lines of grief and responsibility softened by joy. When we exchanged vows, Sophia squeezed between us, her tiny hands clutching both of ours. As Adrian slipped the ring onto my finger, Sophia's voice broke through, trembling with sincerity. "Can I call you Dad now?" she asked, her eyes wide, her lips trembling in that way that made my chest ache. Adrian crouched down to her level, tears welling in his eyes. "Only if you really want to," he whispered. She threw her arms around his neck. "I do. You're my dad. I will never forget the look on his face in that moment. Relief, love, and the silent promise that he would never let her down. After that day, life settled into something I had only dared to dream about. Clea had her own sunny room with shelves for her books and toys. Gingerbread stretched lazily across the windowsill, fattening from the treats. Sophia snicked him, and I, for the first time in years, had the luxury of thinking about something beyond survival. It started almost as a joke. I wrote little blog posts about Gingerbread's recovery, Sophia's imaginative games with him, the way he strut-deaded around the apartment as if he were king. I posted pictures, Sophia hugging him, Gingerbread balancing on the edge of a chair, even his mischievous habit of knocking pens off Adrian's desk. I thought only a handful of people would ever see them. But within weeks, the blog exploded. Messages poured in from strangers who said Gingerbread's story gave them hope, that our little family reminded them not to give up. I didn't earn money from it. Not at first, but the validation meant something. For once, people weren't looking down on me as the cleaning woman, the single mother in a damp basement. They saw me as someone who had endured, someone who mattered. Adrian encouraged me, often sitting beside me in the evenings as I typed, his hand brushing mine, his smile full of pride. Sophia loved reading the comments aloud, giggling when someone called Gingerbread a miracle cat. Those were golden days, fragile and fleeting. I let myself believe they would last. But Helen never congratulated us, never smiled at Sophia, calling Adrian Dad. She came to the wedding but stayed stiff, her eyes sharp as glass, her hands folded like clenched fists. And afterward, though she visited less often, I felt her presence like a shadow pressing against the walls. I should have known peace like ours could never exist without a storm following close behind. It was a gray afternoon, the kind when the Portland rain seemed determined to seep into every crack of the city. Adrian was still at the clinic finishing late appointments, and Clea was upstairs in her room drawing. I was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Helen standing there, dressed immaculately as always, a polished smile plastered across her face. In her hands, she carried a box of pastries and a tin of tea. I thought I dropped by, she said smoothly though. Her tone carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Just a little peace offering. Every instinct told me to keep the door closed, but politeness, or perhaps nativity, made me step aside. She breezed past me, her perfume filling the air, and settled herself at the dining table as though she owned it. I brought your favorite chamomile, she said, placing the tin on the table. Why don't we share a cup? Just the two of us. It's time we learned to get along. I moved to the kitchen, my pulse quickening as I boiled water. I caught sight of her in the hallway mirror that hung just at the right angle to reflect the table. Helen's face was tight with focus as she pulled a small vial from her handbag. My breath caught in my throat with a quick glance toward the kitchen. She tipped a few drops of something clear into one of the cups before sliding the vial back into her bag. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed denial. It couldn't be what I thought, but the image of the liquid swirling in the cup was undeniable. My hands trembled as I carried the tray back into the room. Here we are, I said, forcing my voice steady as I set the cups down. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure she could hear it. Helen slid the tainted cup toward me with a faint smile. To new beginnings, she said. In that instant, survival instincts I didn't know I had took over. I shifted the cups, pretending to adjust the saucers, and placed the poisoned one in front of her instead. She raised it to her lips, without hesitation. The first sip was followed by a faint frown, then a cough. Within minutes, her face blanched, her hand clutching at her chest. The teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Sophia, I shouted, my voice cracking. Stay upstairs. Call 911. I knelt beside Helen as her body convulsed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sirens wailed in the distance. Minutes later, though they felt like hours, the paramedics rushed in, lifting her onto a stretcher, their radios crackling with urgency. At the hospital, toxicology tests confirmed what I already knew. Poison. The police arrived. Soon after asking questions, combing through the apartment. They found the vial still in her handbag, fingerprints all over it. There was no denying it. When Adrian finally arrived, the color drained from his face as the officers explained. He sat heavily in a chair, his hands pressed against his temples, disbelief etched into every line of his face. I stood nearby, numb. The woman who had despised me from the beginning had just tried to kill me and nearly killed herself instead. It was the moment our fragile peace shattered completely, leaving nothing but fear, betrayal, and a truth too sharp to ignore. Helen survived, though the doctors said it was a narrow escape. When she finally regained strength enough to speak, the police were already waiting. I was there, too, standing just outside the hospital room with Adrian's hand clasped tightly in mine. What she revealed that day shook us both to the core. "It wasn't my idea," she whispered hoarsely, her eyes darting. "Between us, it was Amanda. She told me you'd never belong to me again if Lisa stayed in your life. She said, if I didn't act, I'd lose you forever." Adrian stiffened beside me. Amanda Brooks, his childhood friend, the one who had hovered at family gatherings, who always seemed to find reasons to call him, who looked at me with barely concealed disdain. Suddenly, her subtle digs, her offers to help out, all of it, made a sinister kind of sense. The detectives pressed her for details, and the whole story unraveled. Amanda had fed Helen poison, disguised as herbal supplements, telling her it would help calm her nerves, then urged her to use it against me. She had fueled Helen's fear of losing her son until it twisted into something reckless. But the investigation didn't stop there. Digging deeper, the police uncovered something even darker. Amanda's fingerprints and phone records connected her to the accident that killed Adrian's first wife. What had always been written off as a tragic twist of fate now had a face and a motive. Amanda had wanted Adrian for herself for years, and she'd been willing to destroy anyone in her path to get him. I watched Adrian's face as the truth sank in. His grief for Claire, his anger at Amanda, his devastation at his own mother's betrayal. All of it collided in his eyes. I reached for his hand, and he clung to mine as though it was the only steady thing left in his world. Amanda was arrested. I'll never forget the sight of her being led out of the Reed house in handcuffs, her once carefully constructed image in ruins. For me, it was justice, but for Adrian, it was something closer to release. A terrible weight he'd carried. 4 years finally lifted, even if it came with new scars. Helen changed after that. She wept when she realized she had been nothing more than a pawn in Amanda's cruelty. For weeks she apologized to me, to Adrian, to Sophia. I didn't forgive her immediately. Trust isn't something you rebuild with words alone. But when I saw her cradle our newborn son months later, tears streaming down her face as she whispered promises into his tiny ears, I knew she was trying, and that had to be enough. Life moved forward. Sophia thrived in school, proudly introducing herself as Adrian's daughter. Gingerbread lounged like a king across the back of the couch, his once broken body now strong and sleek. My blog grew into something bigger than I ever expected. And with Adrian's encouragement, I turned it into a real career. And me, I grew too. 4 years, I had lived in basements and shadows, believing love and stability were things other people had. But standing in her home with Adrian's arms around me, Sophia laughing in the yard, and the baby cooing in Helen's embrace, I finally felt what it meant to belong. Our journey hadn't been easy. It had been full of storms, betrayals, and near disasters. But somehow through it all, we found our way to healing. And in that healing, we found our revenge. Not by destroying those who hurt us, but by living a life they never thought we deserved. We were a family at last.